so that we could actually go around. So, does anybody need this? Okay. Right, let's begin. That still looks rather messy.
You guys need that?
It's very hard. That's actually a student's piece that I'm assessing, but we haven't finished assessing. Okay. Val, what do you think of the readings thus far? Are we any further along with synthetic versus, could you open the window? It's actually open as well. Versus any of the other forms. And actually, I wanted to also mention the groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, which is one of the other books that is critical for you to take a look at and read and digest. This work is, it will probably give you even a wider understanding of why the will can be seen as the imperative, the categorical imperative, and why that will is the primary feature for art, for making art in Kant's argument. Now the other thing I want to mention is that the notion of aesthetic in Kant, I didn't think was clarified, or I certainly didn't feel like I had clarified it enough last time. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page on this one, and then I'll open it up for everybody. For a lay sense of the aesthetic tends to mean like the sensual, or the sense, you say something has an aesthetic, it has kind of, I don't know what, a tone or a way, a feeling to it, or something like that. There's some very basic views about what aesthetic means, and that is not how he's using it. The aesthetic for Kant, and the aesthetic for anyone who's using Kantian mood formally, it is another word for judgment. You need to understand that that's what's going on there. So the judgment is already furry. It's already got different aspects to it. But this notion of the judgment is critical for then linking it with will. Because this is the game that's going to be played. He's starting with this thing called experience, but then he says he's not really starting with experience. He's starting with this thing called a categorical imperative on some level, an a priori synthetic unity, something like that, but then he's not really starting with it. So, and that's where we kind of got last discussion last week. And I wanted to have a sense, I asked you to go back and reread the Prolegomena, how do you pronounce it? I don't know if I'll say it right. I have to look at Mattia to you say it? Prolegomena, there we go. The Prolegomena, but what did you come away with in the end? Where are we? What would you say is the critical features now? Or shall we just jump into Kant? Do you remember what we talked about last week? I said it lovingly.
The analytic, the synthetic,
yes, and what is the difference between analytic?
Well, analytic is more explicative.
Is what?
Explicative.
Okay, which is not descriptive. Okay. And what does it mean to be analytic? How can we be analytic with our art? What does it mean to be analytic?
To look at the way that it's done rather than...
It doesn't bring nothing new to what it is.
It doesn't
so
add,
just
yes.
describe because description is bad word, but describes what it is.
Can you explain that without using the word describe?
Yeah, I'll try.
Okay. No, without using fingers.
It's analytical judgment. It's the way of explaining. No, that's different.
Anybody else want to give it a go?
Give me a word.
Deconstruct.
You're supposed to be not involved, I thought.
Oh no, that's true. I'm just listening.
Yes, that's a good word. That's a
Yeah.
good word. Anybody, what does it mean if one says analytic? What are you meant to be saying? What is meant to happen if you give something that's analytic? If I write on something that says, these are your essay questions, it has to be an analytic essay. What is implied by that sentence?
To take it apart in some way.
And to, yes, and to take it apart in what way?
Methodically.
Methodically. And what's the method? Reason. And what type of reason?
Comparison?
I feel like I was just at the dentist the other day. This is reminding me of it. Pulling the teeth. Okay, how is it? Say it again?
Concepts of reason, concepts of comparison you'll be using in
Rigor.
analytical.
Okay, so far nobody seems to know what reason
Rigor?
is. Yeah, and what is rigor and why is it different than rigor mortis? Because if you're not bringing anything new, and you're basically describing something, but how do you know when you're finished with the description?
It's based on a priori assumptions or definitions.
Can be getting warmer. How do I know if I'm looking at this painting, or let's say this one since most people can see it, that it is, that we can make an analytic remark about it? What would be an analytic remark to this image?
It's a print.
Yeah, it's a print.
Do you reduce it to a concept or identity?
You can reduce it to a concept, yes, and the concept could be an identity, therefore a description, or a concept could be something that holds it completely. Yes?
Firstly, I mean, the analytic is a judgment, therefore is a proposition. And it's a proposition that states something based on the necessity of the subject. So something that no one is absolutely right in saying that it's got to do with the principle of identity, because an analytical judgment only states what is part of its concept, unpacks
Yeah,
the concept, doesn't take anything else.
right,
In that sense, it is truly something wrong.
right. Did you follow that? So Tamsin was saying there's an a priori, and you're suggesting the a priori, what makes it the a priori situation is that you're able to pull it together as opposed to, it is the construction of construction, not taking apart.
It is a proposition that makes sense. It says something without needing something outside itself.
Okay, and how do you know that that's what you're doing when you're doing it?
Yeah, that's the problem. The problem with Kant.
That is the problem. The problem is, it's all very well good to state that you're being analytic, but how do you know you're being analytic and not just saying, well, you know, I like that, I don't like that, I like this. How do you know you're not just giving an opinion?
But some things can be considered, and adding underline can be considered because it is shaking around already to be self-evident. And this is what Kant is trying to move away from, because the analytic was the easy explanation would be that there are some truths that are obvious, and therefore we take them as axioms.
Okay.
While it says that there are some things that are really nice things for the moment, that even when we strip everything else we can say about something, we cannot claim something about the thing without having that, without mentioning it.
Okay.
And so, for
So give
example,
an example using this image.
well, the image or even the
The can of Coke, yeah.
that it needs to be in space and time.
Right, okay.
It cannot
Next very
be
important
thought
point.
or be mentioned or be used without space and time.
Okay, so let's start again. So now we know that the analytic immediately involves 2D and 3D. Or just 3D?
Just 3D altogether. right?
3D altogether, good. Okay, that was a trick question, I'm sorry.
4D would be time, yes.
Okay, so, analytic, let's remember this sentence now. Analytic, so if I say, give me an analytic remark on this. try it again with, how does bringing the question of space and time in any way speak to this image?
Well, I mean, almost anything one can say about it is already synthetic. No,
Okay,
if
we
I
have
say
got
it is
there.
a rectangle, it's synthetic, it's not analytic.
Great, okay.
If
So
I
we're
say
never
it is-
gonna get to
If I
analytic.
say it is flat, but if I say it is here,
Yes.
I'm getting close. I don't think it is purely analytic.
So what's synthetic then? Try synthetic. If I said, how would you understand this? How would you make comments about this in the synthetic reasoning?
Saying that the photograph is rectangular, or the object is flat, or it is new. All these are synthetic.
And why?
judgment.
And why? Because didn't you just say that it had to do with just saying what it is, and that was analytic?
Yes, but they need to go out of something that is necessary to the concept to exist as a concept, and take something from outside, through the senses, physically through the senses, and add it to the proposition in order to expand its sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find it really difficult. Like the example he gives, like he gives all bodies are extended, magnetic, and then he gives all bodies are heavy, the synthetic. But I was finding that actually really difficult to get what this
What
distinction.
page were you on that?
It's in the introduction.
It's
42, is it called?
That was 42, okay. 42, yeah.
it's on the distinction between analytic and synthetic.
Yeah, it's on 48, right? Yeah. Jacob, could you, that's all right. Can you read what you think she's going to?
If I say, for instance, all bodies are extended, this is an analytic judgment, for I do not require to go beyond the concept which I connect body in order to find extension as bound up with it.
Okay, did that sentence make sense? If I say, for instance, all bodies are extended, what does that mean to say all bodies are extended? What does it mean to extend it?
Position in space.
Yeah, so I'm there. The there, the here, you are here moment, okay? If I say, for instance, you are here, this is an analytic judgment. For I do not require to go beyond the concept with which I connect with body, the question of here. So if I say, you are here, looking at a map, you are here, that is an analytic judgment. Clear? Make sense? We're following? Okay. In order to find extension is bound up with it. To meet with this predicate, I have merely to analyze the concept, that is, to become conscious to myself, the manifold which I always think in that concept. The judgment is therefore analytic. But when I say all bodies are heavy, the predicate is something quite different from anything that I think in the mere concept of body in general, and the addition of such a predicate therefore yields a synthetic judgment. So, why is the all bodies are X different than you, Dane, are there? Or you, Dane, are here? Why is that? What's the difference between the two?
It's the particular and the universal.
Good. Okay, so immediately you begin to hopefully make some sense on this, that when you have something that is positioned as already a concept by saying all bodies, you already need a concept which is not present in space and time. It is existing in some other fashion. That is lending itself to creating a question of the synthesis of the synthetic judgment. So to have this synthetic moment going on, you're going to be able to state things like all bodies are heavy, or anytime one comes across you, we're referring to maps. You are here. Or anytime you hear you are here, we're referring to maps. that would be a synthetic as opposed to analytic. Because you need to then have the whole concept of maps. What is a map? Where are you seeing it? I'm not telling you which map, I'm not telling you how that map exists. I'm just saying that when you have this sentence, you are here, you know that a map is somehow being put forward. Something like that. That would be a synthetic. Analytic would be Dane is here, or you are here, and the here that is here is right here, right now, or is here in a specific historical moment. So it again deals with the space and time. Clearer, anyway? Get a bit? So now we're going to try again. Can you talk about this in either analytic or synthetic terms? Oh, too early. Too early in the seminar for that.
I was thinking of a previous comment to make before trying to go over the painting. As per experience, which is the part we're speaking about now, the step, the analytic is actually the image of nature given by Newton.
Right. And what is
which
that
is a
image?
stage made out of the three-dimensional space plus the vector of time.
Right.
And nothing, that's actually says it somewhere
Yeah.
in the prolegomena that there is no space beyond this. This is the space. The
Right.
three dimension width, depth, and height plus time are the dimensions of space. There isn't another space beyond those three dimensions.
Right.
So one has to, those are thinkable in abstract as pure forms of perception before anything is placed in them, whether it is the code
Yeah.
painting.
And so in that sense, it falls into a kind of synthetic, in the sense that you have to have a concept of the space-time vectors. But, or is that what you're saying?
No, that just occurred to me now that that's what analytic means for the static judgment.
Right.
The static judgment, the pure reason.
Yes.
The forms of for grasping any object and making it an object experience.
So we're getting warmer now. So can you begin to get a sense why Kant has a lot of, let's say, reverence for the notion of the analytic, but at the same time wants to move away from it? He wants to move away from it because the notion of the analytic, let's say, will bring in the Newtonian move. And the Newtonian move always already ascribes cause and effect to its judgment. And so you can make a calculation based on, something like Z, because you can do an analytic move dealing with space-time and its relationships to each other that will produce a future moment based on that analytic, based on those positions. Whereas synthetic reasoning won't do that. And he wants to develop this question of the synthetic in order to allow for a rigorous way of grasping art, and not just art, but certainly, at least we're just organizing this around that comment, so that not everything counts as art for Kant. And you can also have different types of art, like good art, or bad art, or mediocre. You can make judgments about the art. Now, in order to make a judgment about the art, if it's really strictly synthetic, the judgment can't be made they certainly can't be made in the same way that an analytic judgment can be made. Because an analytic judgment can be right and wrong. You can say, two objects in the same space occupy the same place, and so if they're doing that, you have an accident. That is the reality. But he wants to offer another reality that allows for the same, let's say, type of rigor without making it static. The fear that a lot of people have around the question of science, for example, coming into art practices, is precisely that it will become analytic. It will bring in an analytic death knell. So we have to be clear that we understand, and if you're using analytic, is it possible to use analytic in a way that will allow you to derive comments about good, bad, or indifferent art. Can you do that? So that's what that's the way in which he's beginning to establish this question. If you look on page 49, where it has a little asterisk, judgments of experience, he's going again by saying that how do you actually have an aesthetic of experience? How do you actually judge experience? How do you have an aesthetic of it? It's going to say art is the aesthetic of experience. That's why aesthetic and art often get confused as the same term, by the way. Whereas aesthetic, like I said, is a judgment, but it's a judgment that is based on a synthetic, in fact, we go further, an a priori synthetic unity of something being unified. Anybody feel like reading aloud? Okay. If you can just read that paragraph, which goes over to the second page. And in this paragraph, try and get a sense of your own artwork and whether it fits in here. Whether we're forcing something into a tightly fitting shoe, or whether it is the shoe, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, without trying to.
It is section 4.
Yeah, section 4, yeah.
From the beginning,
From where it says judgments of experience. Does everybody have that able to be found in their various translations?
judgment of experience.
It should be on page 49.
It's 44 in mine.
Is it?
1 or 2 in mine.
Okay.
Just starting from the black.
And I would just like to say, as a future note, if you wouldn't mind when you write your essays and because you're going to become famous essayist apart from everything else, could you just put sections down so that when they're translated in different moments and different page sizes and everything else, future people and future readers of your work will be able to deal with it just like we are, without having to have a complete and utter nervous breakdown about finding it. Okay, go ahead.
Empirical judgment as such are all synthetic. That's the heading of the part.
Okay, so now, yes, and the way that works in, what edition do you have? Who translated?
Max Muller.
Max Muller.
And Marcus Babe.
Okay, so in the Norman Kemp Smith Standard Edition, the accepted correct edition, that very first sentence starts out, judgments of experience as such are one and all synthetic. Now read your first sentence again.
Empirical judgments as such are all synthetic.
Okay, so see the big difference? You know, the word experience is now being interchanged for empirical. So be careful with that.
It uses both and it goes back and forth. And the prolegomena also distinguishes empirical and experience in different ways.
Yes, but when one talks about empirical in this sense, in a kind of formal sense, just to remind everybody, in case you have forgotten where we were with empirical, what does empirical mean versus rational? Mark, you were doing the empirical rational.
Empirical to do with the senses.
The senses, yeah. And what about the rational?
To do with ratios, to do with reason.
So if you say, oh, stop being such an empiricist, or I want to get away from empiricism, or I have issues with empiricism, would that be translated as I don't want to deal with the senses? Or what is brought to bear, what is brought to the table when we use the word empirical or empiricism?
A contact and for a proof from material reality.
Yes. Can you say it again so people can hear it?
A contact and for proof obtained from material reality.
Okay.
So
And-
science is intrinsically empirical.
Right, right. So while it is true that it has to do with the senses, what really is the key here is not the kind of senses that I think that some people would like to privilege, whether it's smell or sight or this kind of sensory. It's more to do with the way in which one can actually articulate the realities of experience in such a way that it can be made, it can be modeled in moment 1 and 2 and 3, hence empirical, empirical.
So is it knowledge that comes from the senses?
It's knowledge that comes from the matter of the senses, the materiality, the materializing of the senses. Which is not, it's like a little bit more of a stretch.
But not only, because the empirical is always synthetic.
The empirical is always synthetic, yes.
Therefore, it takes the perception of the senses. If one wants to make a schema or a diagram, Kant really builds it in this way, so with branches on the ladder of articulation of knowledge.
Yeah.
The perception of the senses, which is physically touching, seeing, hearing, and then that is organized by the aesthetic intuition, which is space and time, and becomes experience.
Mm-hmm.
So experience is not a direct contact. It's something else, and it's synthetic. It has already organized this through the modes of understanding.
Right.
The
So,
senses.
in other words, you can't sort of walk in the air and sort of absorb knowledge. That's not experience. So to be clear, experience is not about walking and just having something happen, wash over you, so that sometimes that might be understood as experience. I put my foot in the water, I'm experiencing cold, or I'm experiencing the wet. Something that is not experience as is being said here, which is why they've translated that as empirical there, and why it's open, it's a much vaguer interpretation here, translation here. Okay?
Last week we were reading the first paragraph where he says all knowledge begins with experience, and then he goes on to explain what he means by experience.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to just reread that a little bit?
There can be no doubt that all of our knowledge begins with experience. For how should the faculty of knowledge be called into activity, if not by objects which affect our senses, and which partly produce representation by themselves, partly arouse the activity of our understanding to compare, connect, and separate these representations, and thus to convert raw material of our sensible impressions into knowledge of objects, which we call experience. So the raw material is converted through the layering of understanding into the knowledge of function, which we call experience. So experience is already applied.
Yes, so that's right. So experience isn't something that you find or that finds you. It's already been synthesized. And therefore experience is always already based on judgment. Okay, so we're clear about that? So judgments of experience, that is to say, when one, I don't know, puts their foot in the water and they consider that an experience and therefore then make thoughts about it that come out of that toe in the water, that already is operating on a series of judgments. So you're putting your toe in the water as a feature of a fresh new idea that has never been felt before until that very moment. He's saying it doesn't matter if you've never done that before, it's still going to come in as evolving from a series of a priori judgment. Do you understand? That's very important that we get this like little part, because a lot of people looking at Kant and anyway looking at experience don't realize that experience is always second order, not first order. And you don't need to experience in order to make a judgment about it, because it's already sitting there as as already a synthetic environment. Do you understand? Any questions about it? Because it's really important that we get past this one little part, because this trips everyone up. This one little sentence. How are we doing?
There is another element attached to it, which is progressively comes up in later pages, is that the thing, what he calls the thing itself,
Mm-hmm.
that's always beyond us, because we always have only the synthetic relation with it. So whatever that gives to our senses, or whatever affect is the word he uses, we receive from it, that's packaged and synthesized with our modes of perceiving it. So that's what we have as a mode of experience.
Okay, so this creature here, this one, who we'll call Johnny, you experience this creature Johnny in a variety of ways, and will never experience the whole of Johnny, as will, and the same will be said about oneself. You can never know fully yourself. It's not knowable. So to actually be engaged with the thing in itself is beyond the scope of reason. And therefore, all this bullshit around finding the gay gene or the, somebody's gene, tucked inside you, for Kant would be completely ridiculous. Because it would only yield, at the best, an analytic position, and it could never yield the whole story. Now, contrast that with with Hegel. Hegel is going to say you can know the whole story. It's just that the whole story includes not knowing the whole story. So it's slightly annoying. But this is, and that's a very different way of moving. So to get back to Kant is saying that experience is always already synthetic, and therefore it's always already coded, and you will always, or veiled. Actually, he's got a lovely sentence in the groundwork of the metaphysics. I'll just read to you. As he puts it, every translation, this is the translator is talking about the way in which one deals with Kant's work in general and how this deals with the question of experience. Every translation must to some extent be a veil, but it need not be an unbecoming one. Well, it was like, yeah, that's okay, so what's there? So the first point that I think we've made big headway here if you really, really, really have heard this, which is that experience is never pure. It's never graspable in and of itself. Whatever is graspable of experience is always already a synthetic, coded moment.
Is there ever a gap?
A gap.
Well, in the grasping of the immediate, it sounds like it turns into a synthesized, ungraspable, not pure. It becomes coded. But is that instant, or is there a moment in there where he thinks?
I heard a voice. Yes. Can you explain that?
No, because the thing becomes appearance within perception. Itself becomes the object. It's not causal to the understanding. So as you say, there is a gap, there is a possibility. It's not causal. The thing doesn't, as it were, grab the concept and supply the concept. That's what I understand you were saying.
Is that did that make sense?
Partly.
It could be space and time are not the word in itself, but for us there is no other way than understanding it through space and time. So there is never
At the
gap.
moment.
And there is no gap. When we perceive it, it is through space and time. Otherwise, we see have no object of experience.
Otherwise, it's not perceivable.
As in, if you want to touch something, it's going to go through your fingers or your skin. Otherwise, you don't touch it. So you don't have information from it.
So let's start again. I feel that we will get through this book by the middle of June. Let's start again. So we kind of haven't quite really come to terms with analytic, but it seems that synthetic's a little bit better to grasp. So synthetic starts with experience, which often is seen as not synthetic. Usually, young scholars, or older scholars, I don't remember who they are, actually think that experience is a material that you can use like paint or something. But what Kant is saying is that the very first thing you must understand is that experience is always already established by a code or a judgment. And you are simply translating. Although, as the translator of the other one says, you're dealing with a veil, though it doesn't have to be unattractive, which I think is quite an interesting way of looking at it. And he's going to go further and say, this is what art does. Art translates.
Are we in the home run?
Good art.
Good art, yes. Yes, yes. Well, you see, that gets into another question, because is it that art translates, or is it that only good art translates?
And what's the role of the viewer?
And what's the role of the viewer? And so we haven't gotten there yet, so it's like so early. See, this is what I love about Joe. I'm very tired, I'm not going to be able to be anywhere part of this. I'm just completely silent on
Touching
it.
my lips.
No, I think it's great. Okay, so we haven't quite got to the reading of this page, but having said that, can you think of the difference now between analytic and synthetic? Now that we know that synthetic is pretty much everything. Okay,
In the
yes?
previous paragraph, at the beginning of section 4,
Mm-hmm.
it says, analytic judgments, affirmative ones, are therefore those in which the connection of the predicate with the subject is thought through identity, while those in which this connection is thought without identity should be called synthetic. The former, the analytic ones, might be called elucidatory, the later expansive judgments, because in the former nothing is added to the predicate, to the concept of the subject. And the concept is only analyzed and broken up into its constituent concepts, which had all along been thought in it.
You're right, okay.
So it is an exercise of reason, in a certain way, but not gratuitous, not backwards. One has a concept and sees how far the concept can stretch without needing something external to it.
To stretch it.
Yeah.
Okay, but it still seems tautological a bit here.
Well, it isn't tautological, because then it goes on to when I makes the example. If I say, for instance, all bodies are extended, this is analytic judgment, and I don't need to go beyond the concept, because extension connects to the concept of body.
Body has to have extension.
It needs that
Yeah.
portion of space.
It can't, the body can't be somehow existing without having its
For it to be a
extension.
body,
Yeah,
it has to have space.
yeah, right.
And before then there is the property of non-contradiction, and in this physical declension where it's two bodies cannot be in the same place at the same time.
Right.
So all these are analytic judgments.
Right.
The other thing that is important, which I pointed out earlier, but just didn't realize it before, is that although it is not yet said in this paragraph, it must be universal.
Yes.
So I can claim it of every instance, every that I might encounter in the future, precisely because it is a form for grasping it, and not a specific property of the thing
Okay,
itself.
so I want you to, hopefully this is being recorded. Is it being recorded? Hopefully this particular line you will now listen to many times until it becomes like second nature to you. But I want to move on, okay, unless there are other questions about that. Are there any other questions about that?
I'm trying to think, is the analytic continuous or discontinuous?
What's your guess?
I would say the analytic is discontinuous, but then I'm not sure. I'd say experience is infinitely divisible if it's located in sort of space and measured space and time. It could be cut down into any number.
So for that reason, experience is continuous, and therefore analytic is discontinuous. Is that how you're getting there?
It's one way to look at it, but I'm not sure.
No, I was asking if I heard you right.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
perhaps.
pocket that. That's a very interesting remark because we know where that's taking Dane, our resident physicist. Yeah.
By saying discontinuous, somehow I was going back to when we were in Leibniz. And here is very distant from Leibniz.
Yeah.
Because Leibniz speaks of space as relation between bodies. So something that doesn't exist in itself, and vice versa. Here it is in a priori form. Something that must be there, even if it is a form of intuition, in order for us to grasp reality.
So is it possible that either both analytic and synthetic judgments or synthetic logics are discontinuous, or both are continuous, or one is continuous and the other one's discontinuous? That's the question you put on the table.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that's a good question. We're not going to answer that yet because it's complex. But the answers to those questions, I don't think people are ready yet to be able to engage it yet. But the answer to those questions underscore why people move toward a Kantian model versus a Hegelian model in the 21st century, which is kind of a weird thing. But anyway, okay, let's try this paragraph.
Okay. Empirical judgments as such are all synthetic. Would it be absurd to found an analytic judgment on experience? Sorry, I have to read it again. For it would be absurd to found an analytic judgment on experience.
Okay, so he's saying that it would be completely ridiculous to found analytic explanation, analytic judgment, analytic remark based on experience. Okay, because we know that the analytic is a universal remark that deals with space and time. I'm going to keep repeating this so you can get used to the lingo. Okay.
My translation uses ground instead of found, which is...
Oh, that's, can you read yours?
Yep, pretty much the same, but judgments of experience, as such, are all synthetic, for it would be absurd to ground an analytic judgment on experience.
Yeah, that's quite a good one. Who's your translator?
It's the UK one.
Oh, that's the newest one. Is that the one you suggested, Mark? Somebody suggested that one.
That's probably me.
Oh, oh, good one. Okay, continue.
It would be absurd to ground an analytic judgment on experience, because in order to form such a judgment, I must not step outside my concept, and I need not appeal to the testimony of experience. So I should not step outside a concept, and I not need external help.
Okay, so an analytic concept means that you don't need to add or subtract anything to it to make it true. This translation here says, this is the Norman Kemp Smith one, says, since in framing the judgment I must not go outside my concept, there is no need to appeal to the testimony of experience in its support. That a body is extended is a proposition that holds a priori and is not empirical. Okay, so go on.
Before I call in experience, I already have the concept of body. In the concept of body, all the conditions required for my judgment. I have only to extract from this concept, in accordance with the principle of contradiction, to the required predicate, and thus I become conscious at the same time of the necessity of the judgment. The necessity being the self-support, the self-justification. I need to make this judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what experience could never. Sorry, and that is what experience could never teach me.
Okay.
The necessity.
Dane, you want to read your version of it? Because I bet you it's slightly clearer.
Judgments of experience, as such, are all synthetic.
Just slow.
For it would be absurd to ground an analytic judgment on experience, since I do not need to go beyond my concept at all in order to formulate the judgment, and therefore need no testimony from experience for that. That a body is extended is a proposition that is established a priori, and is not a judgment of experience. For before I go to experience, I already have all the conditions for my judgment in the concept, from which I merely draw out the predicate in accordance with the principle of contradiction, and can thereby at the same time become conscious of the necessity of the judgment, which is experience could never teach me.
See, so he already starts to bring in the whole question of dialectics and do you remember what the principle of contradiction is?
Thesis and antithesis.
Good, and what does that mean? What does it mean to have the principle, what does it mean when one invokes this? All there is and all there isn't, that's the whole thing. So the principle of contradiction is precisely the annihilation of one to the other. One cannot exist without the other, and one can only exist in this relationship. So the contradiction means that the anti of the one is the pro of the other. And to exist in the same space, one has to annihilate the other. That's what the principle of contradiction is about. So contradiction does not mean being negative or being in a bad mood or like always being contrary to everybody. Contradiction means annihilation. It's a very strong position. And it's because of that position and because Hegel so vehemently wanted to base philosophy on analytic that he dispenses with the rest of the synthetic judgment, which is a big coup from the point of view of from the Hegelian move. And he basically says you have to start with the contradiction. That is a requirement. You cannot, it is correct not to bring an experience. You must leave it aside. You have this contradiction, and that is the deep cut. And this famous deep cut, which then becomes a lack, not to hate, it then becomes the excess or versus the lack, or it becomes some other thing, the in-between, the excluded middle. That's what this is based on, the fundamental principle of contradiction. And so what he's introducing in this is a very different way in to understand how art matters. And that for Hegel, art is part of the stepping stone to knowledge. But for Kant, it is knowledge. So it's a very different move, and this is where it begins here, where he starts playing around with this notion of the synthetic and this a priori thing. Okay, try again. Continue.
On the other hand, although I do not include the predicate of happiness in the concept of a body in general, that concept nevertheless indicates an object of experience through one of its parts, so that I can add to that part other parts of the same experience, beside those which belong to the concept of a body, as to the concept of a body in general. I may first acquire knowledge of the concept of a body analytically through the characteristic of extension, invertibility, shape, etc., all of which are taught in this concept. Afterwards, I expand my knowledge, and looking back on the experience from which I abstracted my concept of body, I find evidence to be always connected with the aforementioned characteristics, and therefore I add it as a predicate synthetically to that concept. It is therefore experience on which the possibility of the synthesis of the predicate of happiness with the concept of body is founded or grounded.
Okay, so what is he saying there? What is experience then?
These long sentences are just sounding in my mind and I couldn't break it up.
The German way of phrasing, so at the end is the whole explanation of it works backwards. Okay, Jane.
So experience is it's a form of synthesis that brings together what I know analytically and the information, the data that I get through the perception, and is elevating that data to a degree, it says earlier, already of universality. Where he says that happiness is always connected with the aforementioned characteristics.
Okay.
So once I have that, then I can make a synthetic judgment. When I can abstract and project to infinity the individual data I have collected.
Okay, that's close.
Not repository. Repositories.
Okay.
He's always making repositories.
And what is a repository?
Well, I mean, like it's this kind of a priori kind of mix of a repository.
okay, so there's always like a reserve army of something going on, a reserve army of experiences going on.
Yes, it's like a claim to this repository, which is often.
Okay, so hang on to that for a second. Stuart?
It's not quite answering that, but thinking in terms of talking about the image analytic or synthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking it's not a question of either or. Is it about duration? So we go through analytic and we achieve synthetic. Yeah.
Very, very warm.
Right.
So warm it's forced Tamsin to get rid of her jumper. Very warm.
I'm
Very
kind of
warm.
thinking, it talks about the concept, and that's the thing. Concept is to be closed up in order to make analytical judgment. So if the concept is not fully enclosed within itself,
Yeah,
you cannot do analytical judgment at
Right.
all.
that's
So
correct.
art, you cannot do analytical judgment at all with art, can you? In a way.
Well, I think the at all is too strong.
Well, because you always experience, you always have that moment. You always bring something else with it. To the art.
Okay, hold that as a possible critique. Sorry, Dane, yes?
He does say in the critic's judgment how by pursuing art via the analytic you induce a paradox. So you need the synthetic to sort of
Break that paradox.
and to understand art you have to have the synthetic.
Okay, good. So you could go via analytic, but if you do, you would kill the art. Is that what you're
You
saying?
induce a paradox.
You
So
induce
that
a paradox.
The analytic doesn't complete
So it's not
itself.
quite what Stuart was saying, in the sense that it's like gonna have both. If you do have both, if you do take it on with both, then a paradox will be put forward. Now, isn't a paradox kind of a useful thing in art? So let's just let that rest for a sec. Yes.
And
I
it's
love you.
kind of sorry, I'm just not myself. The interesting thing about this is the key to understanding art, but isn't art a bit like identity? Is it possible ever to understand fully art? Or is art something which brings something to the table but can't be fully known? I don't know.
Okay,
Would be
that's
my
good. Thank you.
thought.
That's well done. Okay, can you read that part that Mattia just read, but in your translated version?
On the contrary,
What is
On
the
other
page?
hand, look on the yes.
yeah,
What, yours is page, what, 26 or something?
142.
142.
Very lengthy introduction.
Okay.
On the contrary, although I do not at all include the predicate of weight in the concept of a body in general, the concept nevertheless designates an object of experience for a part of it, to which I can therefore add still other parts of the same experience as belonging with the former. I can first cognise the concept of body analytically through the marks of extension, of interpenetrability, of shape, etc., which are all fought in this concept. But now I amplify my cognition, and, looking back to the experience from which I had extracted this concept of body, I find that weight is also always connected with the previous marks, and I therefore add this synthetically as predicate to that concept. It is thus experience on which the possibility of the synthesis of the predicate of weight with the concept of body is grounded, since both concepts, though the one is not contained in the other, nevertheless belong together, though only contingently, as parts of a whole, namely experience, which is itself a synthetic combination of intuition.
Now, do you think that said the same things? Did anybody find that easier to understand, or equally difficult to understand, or more difficult to understand?
I feel like I'm reading 3 books.
Yes, you are. Yes.
In the other version of the introduction,
Yeah. It's 4 books.
it says at the end of this paragraph, there is another sentence that's in A, a new sentence begins after the aforementioned characteristic. A is the previous introduction. A new sentence begins after aforementioned characteristic and ends the paragraph. It is therefore experience, which is the X that lies us outside the concept A, and on which the possibility of synthesis of the predicate B of heaviness with the concept A is founded. It makes it a bit more
Clear.
more embodied. That there
Is that more clear?
there is an X.
As soon as A's and X's come into art school, I've always found that there's a furrowing of the brows. You know, can you say that again? Just,
It is that for experience,
okay, it's this thing called experience, which is, we know, synthetic, right?
which is the X
Okay, so it's the X.
that lies outside the concept A,
Okay, so what would be a concept A? Weight, the concept of weight,
yes,
since we're talking about bodies and weight.
and on which the possibility of synthesis of the predicate B of heaviness with the concept A is founded. So weight was not the right example, but an extension.
Yeah, extension would have been a better example, yes.
So we have the notion of extension, which is the concept attached to a body necessarily. One cannot think of a body without extension. And the possibility of the synthesis, it is therefore experience, which is the A that lies outside the concept, the X that lies outside concept A, and on which, or is experience, the possibility of synthesis of the predicate B, heaviness, with the concept A is founded or grounded. So experience supports both the concept, extension, and the possibility of the synthesis with a new predicate attached to it, extension plus weight, or
Right.
plus color, or plus
Okay.
temperature.
Okay, anybody want to re-say that in another way, or do you want to say it again?
Well,
Without
we
reading
can
it.
think of it in terms of experience has does two things: supports the original concept and the analytical concept,
Right,
and is also the possibility or the regime of the synthesis that attaches to the analytical concept.
so let's play this. So
Something
if
new.
experience can't attach to the analytic, if for some reason the experience is not able to attach itself to the analytic, or the analytic is not able to attach itself to experience, what happens?
There is nothing. There is no synthesis. There is no cohesion. So the information never
So
reaches. And
therefore, whatever conclusions come out, if in fact that can't be attached, can't be called reason. What I'm trying to get you to think through, is why is something called reason? A, because it follows a logic and it understands the relationship to how patterns are formed. And in the forming of these patterns, how you can make a conclusion with the duration of the pattern or the multiplicity of the pattern, you know that there's some other thing that can happen. So to understand how a pattern operates, for example, you need to have an analytic way into the question. But in order to make it work, this pattern, somehow it needs to be attached to the experience, to the synthetic judgment, which is the experience. And the synthetic judgment, if it's not able to be attached, one of two things happens. Either it becomes a cold or rationalistic understanding of pattern, and therefore may or may not work for whatever the purposes are that you're trying to deal with it, or it can't be proven. Because the level of experience comes in at the same level of observation to make a link between the analytic positions that are being put forward and the ability to observe it. The viewer comes in here, but this is also with science. Science becoming, where you need an experiment. By experiment, they mean you have to have someone that can be able to replicate the same experiment. So it's this very narrow path that's being taken right now. I need you to get a sense of how this is happening, this odd trajectory that he's trying to articulate between this notion of analytic and the notion of the synthetic and how they operate together, and how that becomes there's a practical move, and it's also the way in which this is under the critique of pure reason. He's critiquing the fact that if you have purely the notion of the synthetic unity experience, or purely, you're simply dealing with the analytic, you won't be able to actually come up with the sensuous fullness of what it is you're talking about. You're still not going to get to the actual answer, because basically there isn't an answer, or isn't the answer. But there are a couple things that make it make sense, and therefore are answerable. Understood? Or do I need to go over this again? Don't feel bad if I have to go over it again. We will get past page 3. I like them.
It is a bit like saying, since we were thinking of the painting, we are looking for it, let's assume it's not here for us to see.
Okay, and let's assume that it's actually a painting.
We are looking for it, and we say, well, it must be somewhere. That's analytic. If it exists, it must be somewhere.
Right.
But then, if I say, now, I see Stuart looking at the cupboard, I say, no, it cannot be there. That's synthetic, because the information I have painted tells me it's too big to fit in that,
Right.
in that space.
So you're suggesting that if you have information that you then calculate, and the calculation shows that it doesn't fit, you're calling that synthetic?
Yes.
Okay.
So anything that is computed, there is the interesting example later on where it goes on describing how mathematics is always synthetic, because there is, if I sum 5 plus 7 equal to 12, in 5 and 7 there is absolutely nowhere the concept of 12. So I have to calculate that.
Right.
And that's synthetic.
Yes. And not analytic. So that's very important. Can we move on? Or is that, are you making faces because A, you get it, B, you don't get it, C, you get and don't get it? None of the above. Gonna move on. C. Okay, are we able to get, do you have a sense of how this is operating then? This question of the analytic kind of versus, or let's say as distinct from the synthetic, or do we need to go give another kick at the can? I really want to make sure we get this. It's really critical.
Well, I wouldn't mind another kick at the can.
Okay.
Just because I just getting my head around the liveness and somehow then turning to this like it doesn't sort of match this.
It doesn't match.
Jiggling everything round again and
Yeah.
to get how he's using it.
What Kant does call the critique of reason an apology for Leibniz. Leibniz got it wrong.
That's right.
In the the German tradition.
It's never ending. The academics. It's just the bitter, twisted, evil queens.
There are some elements of likeness, but they're very hidden.
Yes, but I think he's getting rid of the sacred thing. It's more important.
So,
So it seems to be, seems more radical, but I mean obviously
Leibniz gets rid of the a priori.
Yeah.
Yes, and Kant seems to be, or not seems to be, is
What's
bringing in.
system?
Yes.
Obviously with the sublime bit where he gets into the dynamics line, it all starts getting interesting. But in terms of what he seems to be doing here, he seems to be wanting to make a system. He seems to like it's like sort of the capacity in our thought that is capable of emergence. He seems to sort of want to ground that in fundamental principles. So to be sort of saying, well, it's not like it's not this direct access with raw data, something else is happening. But we must investigate this and pin it down to fundamental principles.
Yes.
And make a system of it. So that's closing it up a bit and make it a priori. So
Well,
it's the repository of the a priori.
Making something into a system does not necessarily mean that it's being closed off.
Well, the thing is,
Or does it? Does it imply that?
It's like you could have the open and closed system, but the thing is with the system, it's a system and it's still like I forgot what to say there, but it is.
The system implies a certain kind of continuity, and if you're trying to deal with discontinuity,
It doesn't. It's still like it deploys like the opposite blur factor.
Yes, it does
to
deploy
carry
the
out the
opposite.
rules, to carry out the rules, you have to sort of artificially create the things that you're operating on. The things you have to sort of make the separations of the identities of the patterns of the so you're sort of deploying something, which is so this is to me like the computer simulation where you operate with variables and your samples. But on the other hand, what's at play kind of actually is blurred, and that's why it's back to Leibniz, is what's at play is not separated, it's this.
I agree with concerns of Florence, but at the same time, I think that there is an element of plasticity in Kant's system, but limited, because the system it builds is
And by plasticity you mean?
some adaptability to
Yes,
what happens.
okay, I just want to make sure you're not talking about plastic art.
No, but it is limited to the fact that there is plasticity because the system is hollow. It's just rules for function, but it doesn't have any. It's not prescriptive. It does not prescribe as the previous system would have been. At the same time, his main concern is to also give an answer to human skepticism. He's trying to give a rational foundation to science.
Who's trying to give a rational foundation?
Kant.
Kant is trying to give a foundation. I wouldn't know. I don't know if I go so far as to say a rational foundation.
A justification or a
Yeah,
guarantee that the method
justification.
of science works.
But be very careful with the
Yeah.
words rational, empiricist, while we're doing this.
Yeah,
mean
they're
that-
not rational versus empiricist, but
Thank you.
an explanation of
An explanation,
the
yes.
method of science is worth trust.
Yes, and
Uh,
that's very important because he's trying to make science, he's trying to bring science back to its roots. It's alchemic, hard to categorize roots. Whereas right now, modern science is strictly about categorization. Really. Yeah, what were you gonna say, Sophie? You look like you're gonna.
No, no, sorry.
No, okay. All right. Shall we skip? I would like to. I'm not sure if I'm doing a disservice to you by skipping into the transcendental. Are we able to go that far? How far did you read in Kant?
Aesthetic, transcendental aesthetic.
And so most people read either part one, the transcendental aesthetic, or did you not read part one?
I've only got through the introduction, so aesthetically it's not very
Okay. Is it worth talking about this if you haven't read it, or should we just go into the Republican name of that?
I think sometimes it's fine. If you jump ahead, you actually then can understand.
Catch up.
Understand
Okay.
what happened.
All right.
I wouldn't mind jumping ahead. Oh, it's going to confuse us all completely, and
Okay.
we're just going to walk away from here with
All right.
no
so-
understanding.
Okay, that's excellent. So let's go
Okay.
into what is meant by the word transcendental. And can anyone, other than myself, begin to talk about the difference between transcendental and transcendent? Let's start with that. Yes, Dane.
Transcendence is metaphysical, transcendental is not metaphysical.
Okay, that's one way of doing it. Okay, so what does it mean to say transcendent?
Transcendence, it's something is moved by an outside force towards certain notions outside of itself, certain categories, certain
Okay, that's a good
modes,
enough.
models of
That's
operation.
nice. Okay. Anybody else want to give it a go? Transcendent.
But to add to what Ben said, not to correct it, if you know, is that what is transcendent is beyond these realities.
Is beyond what?
These realities.
Yeah.
Or is beyond the physical reality.
Okay.
That's why it belongs to the realm of ultimate causes, absolute origins,
God.
God, and these things.
Yeah.
Is that which is unknown, isn't it?
It's more than that which is unknown. It does imply and include a question of movement.
So is it a change of state?
Yes, it is a change of state, but it's also a change of state from going from point A to B.
Yes.
So it's moving, like when you
Yes.
think of Jesus transcended to the cross or beyond the cross or whatever he did with the cross. You know, he went
It's usually upward.
up. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
thing about transcendence.
Yeah.
Unless you're in a circle, then up could be there. I'm just kidding. So up. So it speaks to a wider, permanent sense of a law that is not a challenged law. So, in Derrida, in the role of the spectre, this is called something of the spectre. Spectre of Marx, spectres of Marx, yeah. He begins to talk about quasi-transcendence, and then he starts getting to quasi-transcendental. There's a shift. So he doesn't really talk about the transcendental, but he starts to talk about this quasi thing. So what does transcendental mean? What's the difference between
Could I just ask one more question about transcendence?
Of course.
Does it not also though, and I don't speak philosophical language, so it may just confuse us, does that not also imply spiritual movement?
Yes.
Yes.
But that's the idea, that it's a spiritual movement, but spirit can mean many things. It doesn't have to mean God, but it can mean God.
I didn't mean God, I just
Yeah.
meant
No, but the phenomenology of spirit, for example, is translated often into the Hegelian, Hegel's phenomenology of spirit is often translated as this phenomenology of mind. So again, the notion of spirit, one has to be very careful with this notion, because spirit in different languages can constitute a mind-body split, or one spirit, meaning they're kind of joie de vie, that this kind of extra something that you carry. Not quite a soul, it's not quite not a soul.
but it is something other than a physical movement of one body
Yes.
to a different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Versus transcendental.
Transcendental, well, I like to think of it indeed as an incomplete movement of transcendence,
Okay, and what's incomplete about it?
because it keeps on happening, but it's never complete.
It's like Sisyphus, pushing
No,
the rock up.
it's not repetitive in those terms. It's if an earlier metaphysical point of view would have posed the rule of cause and effect as an absolute law in itself that is then applied on every instance, that would have been transcendent.
Say it again, sorry.
If a straightforward metaphysical position would see the law of causality as written law somewhere in the heavens, and which applies to every instance on Earth, and that would be transcendent, because it's completely outside and above and beyond our dimensions. Transcendental is a move that keeps thinking towards this final union, recognizing and abstracting, or through a process of induction to that point, but never reaches it. So it is the vertex of this pyramid is missing. It's open, the open ended.
Okay.
So much that indeed, what's his name, Kant, in the end said that these ideas are like causality or transcendental, because although they are applied and are found only here, they sit nowhere else, and we use them as regulative, as principles, or projection to infinity. It's one of the most important elements to him is that it turns the ground into a projection to infinity of things. So, for example, causality is not a law that exists somewhere and is applied here, but we project the idea that there is a causality in itself. And if projected to infinity is level, infinity is not a place. Therefore, we don't have a law of causality. We have numberless instances
That keeps going
keeps
on.
on going.
Or a
And
graph
so-
that keeps heading to zero and never reaching it.
and then there is, and the same goes for God, as the projection to infinity of moral values, and so this is why the thing is quite turned inside out.
Okay, everybody happy with that? Can we proceed? Now we have a basic,
Can I just read what I wrote last time we spoke about it?
yes, and when we left.
Transcendent God transcendental nougat that tries to be one.
That's very good. I like that. Yes.
That's kind of wrong though.
I was gonna say,
It tries to
don't
be
put that
proper.
in. Okay, let's turn to page, let's turn to the Transcendental Doctrine of Elements. In the Norman Kemp Smith edition, it's page 63. And in Sophie's edition, it's probably 22. And in Dane's edition, it's probably
155.
155. And what's it? And on yours, it's on what?
59. Well, 59 is aesthetic. We want aesthetic and logic.
No, let's go to the aesthetic first. Okay. So
What section are we looking at? Sorry.
we're looking at section 1.
First part of transcendental aesthetic.
Critique of Pure Reason. 1. Transcendental Doctrine of Elements. Actually, before we do that, it probably is worth to read a couple of pages before the, I should have mentioned this before. On page 60, which begins with Transcendental Philosophy.
Is only the idea of the science.
That's it. Can you read that?
Which paragraph is it?
Well, it's B27,
B20.
or actually it's just after B27. It's in fact B28. That's how much after it is. Okay. So,
Transcendental philosophy is only the idea of a science for which the critique of pure reason has to lay down a complete architectonic plan.
okay, a wonderful word, architectonic. Great in Scrabble, several syllable business, several parts to it. But what does it mean? What's architectonic? Okay, just hold on. Okay, we're not going to stop. I want you to find out what architectonic means. Okay, go on.
That is to say, it has to guarantee, as following from principles, the completeness and certainty of the structure in all its parts.
So you see that that's what architectonic means? Okay, so let's say it again. Can you just do the first two sentences again?
Transcendental philosophy is only the idea of a science for which the critique of pure reason has to lay down a complete architectonic plan. That is to say, it has to guarantee, as following from principles, the completeness and certainty of the structure in all its parts.
There was a big fad in PhD land in the 80s and 90s where everything was the architectonics of something or another. So most people's PhD thesis would start with the architectonics of ethics or the architectonics of, art or the and what they were talking about is that there are actual principles. Now, Matthias, it's conceivable that your PhD could be trying to talk about these architectonics in terms of saying, well, what is the creative in the art process? You're talking about feedback loops and complexity, but it's conceivable that you're also suggesting there are certain principles that come into the making of art.
Yes, maybe not.
Okay, all right.
I see why you're saying it.
So, but could that slip a bit like, can you say axioms?
Yes, you can say axioms.
So I've got a bugbear with axioms. It's just if you take it in the lay sense of sort of self-evident truth, the problem is that it's claiming self, claiming identity. So this is why it's like a system. You make a system, actual principle, it's still rooted in identity. So that's what's still close.
Yes. Yes. And that's why you're rejecting it. Yes.
By going from proposition to truth, you're already turning the proposition into a statement.
Yes. Good. Well done. Good spot. Okay, try it again.
Right. What the
So just sort of
two sentences?
Yeah.
Transcendental philosophy is only the idea of a science for which the critique of pure reason has to lay down a complete architectonic plan. That is to say, it has to guarantee, as following from principles, the completeness and certainty of the structure in all its parts. It is the system of all principles of pure reason. And if this critique is not itself to be entitled a transcendental philosophy, it is solely because, to be a complete system, it would also have to contain an exhaustive analysis of the whole of a priori human knowledge. Our critique must indeed supply a complete enumeration of all the fundamental concepts that go to constitute such pure knowledge. But it is not required to give an exhaustive analysis of these concepts, nor a complete review of those that can be derived from them. Such a demand would be unreasonable, partly because this analysis would not be appropriate to our main purpose, inasmuch as there is no such uncertainty in regard to analysis as we encounter in the case of synthesis, for the sake of which alone our whole critique is undertaken, and partly because it would be inconsistent with the unity of our plan to assume responsibility for the completeness of such an analysis and derivation, when in view of our purpose we can be excused from doing so. The analysis of these a priori concepts, which later we shall have to enumerate, and the derivation of other concepts from them can easily, however, be made complete when once they've been established as exhausting the principles of synthesis, and if in this essential respect nothing be lacking in them.
Just keep going to get down to, if you could just read to the end, because it's not very long.
The critique of pure reason, therefore, will contain all that is essential in transcendental philosophy. While it is the complete idea of transcendental philosophy, it is not equivalent to that latter science, for it carries the analysis only so far as is requisite for the complete examination of knowledge, which is a priori and synthetic. What is chiefly to be kept in view in the division of such a science is that no concepts be allowed to enter which contain in themselves anything empirical, or in other words, that it consists in knowledge wholly a priori. Accordingly, although the highest principles and fundamental concepts of morality are a priori knowledge, they have no place in transcendental philosophy, because although they do not lay at the foundation of the precepts the concepts of pleasure and pain, of the desires and inclinations, etc., all of which are of empirical origin, yet in the construction of a system of pure morality, these empirical concepts must necessarily be brought into the concept of duty, as representing either a hindrance, which we have to overcome, or an allurement, which must not be made into a motive. Transcendental philosophy is therefore a philosophy of pure and merely speculative reason. All that is practical, so far as it contains motives, relates to feelings, and these belong to the empirical sources of knowledge.
So what's being said there? Is he critiquing this question of the senses? Is transcendental philosophy what we're doing right now in this seminar, generally speaking? What's being said here? What is chiefly to be kept in view in the division of such a science, so in itself calling it a science, is that no concepts be allowed to enter which contain in themselves anything experiential, or in other words, that it consists in knowledge wholly a priori. Accordingly, although the highest principles and fundamental concepts of morality are a priori knowledge, they have no place in transcendental philosophy. So whether a piece of work is sexually explicit or not, whether a piece of work is obscene, for example, has nothing to do with its value in life. And that's one of the key, that's a very important text here. What has chiefly to be kept in view in the division of such a science is that no concepts be allowed to enter which contain in themselves anything empirical, or in other words, that it consists in knowledge wholly a priori. Accordingly, although the highest principles and fundamental concepts of morality are a priori knowledge, they have no place in transcendental philosophy because, although they do not lay at the foundation of their precepts and concepts of pleasure and pain, of desires and inclinations, etc., all of which are empirical in origin, yet in the construction of a system of pure morality, these empirical concepts must necessarily be brought into the concept of duty, as representing either a hindrance which we have to overcome, or an allurement which must not be taken into a motive. Transcendental philosophy is therefore a philosophy of pure and merely speculative reason. All that is practical, so far as it contains motives, relates to feelings, and these belong to the empirical sources of knowledge. Okay, so continue just to the last two paragraphs.
If we are to make a systematic division of the science which we engage in presenting, it must have first a doctrine of the elements, and secondly a doctrine of the method of pure reason. Each of these chief divisions will have its subdivisions, but the grounds of these we are not yet in a position to explain. By way of introduction or anticipation, we need only say that there are two stems of human knowledge, namely sensibility and understanding, which perhaps spring from a common but to us unknown root. Through the former, objects are given to us; through the latter, they are thought. Now, insofar as sensibility may be found to contain a priori representations constituting the condition under which objects are given to us, it will belong to transcendental philosophy. And since the conditions under which alone the objects of human knowledge are given must precede those under which they are thought, the transcendental doctrine of sensibility will constitute the first part of the science of the elements.
Translation, anyone? Kate, what do you think of all this? You're very quiet.
I'm really struggling with it.
Are you? Are people struggling with Kant then? Does this become much more like sort of treacle-y, like going through treacle? Are you having as much fun as you were having with Leibniz?
Yeah, I am. I like Kant. I find a lot more than liking it.
Okay, so what do you like about Kant?
Because I think, although he separates the analytical and the synthetic, that he keeps contradicting himself as well. Because
So
you
the
have
paradox.
to. Yeah, there is a paradox. You have to apply both when you're thinking. when it
Okay.
comes into play. Yeah. So he's constantly analysing that. And
Okay, so he ends with a very odd thing. Now, insofar as sensibility may be found to contain a priori representation constituting the condition under which objects are given to us, the condition under which objects are given to us, it will belong to transcendental philosophy. And since the conditions under which alone the objects of human knowledge are given must precede those under which they are thought, the transcendental doctrine of sensibility will constitute the first part of the science of the elements. Why word science? Why sensibility? How can you have science and sensibility in the same sentence? What is he saying there?
Is he? You told us not to be, not to ask questions. State. I hear
Thank you.
an answer.
I want you all to be good New Yorkers.
There is an answer
Don't have
to Cartesian need for certainty. In these,
Sorry, say that again.
there is another go at the Cartesian need for certainty in these referring this scientific approach to sensibility.
Wait, I still didn't hear you properly.
There is another go at the problem of Descartes of
Right, okay,
certainty
yeah, right.
in referring to sensibility as a science. Because what he wants to do, what I was saying earlier, that what he's trying to build is a trustworthy method for science. It is because the whole problem still gravitate around the issue of how can I be certain of the knowledge I am gathering or I'm learning. And his answer, simplified mathematically, is that well, we do not know the word, we know the word how we can know it.
Mm-hmm.
But if that is properly described and organized, it is a trustworthy set of information or data that works. And the method he applies is this projection to infinity, where it becomes if the data are the same for everybody, it doesn't really matter that we never reach the can of Coke itself, because we all have the same perception of it. So that's enough for us to function around it
Mm-hmm.
and to trade it and to
But why, what's the purchase of using science and this notion of the transcendental doctrine to create?
It is because it is approaching metaphysics. He says it earlier in the introduction, where he says metaphysics has always been posed dogmatically, that is as a truth that is never questioned, and he is trying to unpack the truth, not to do away with it, but to unpack it and show how it functions, so that it can be applied or restructured.
Mm-hmm.
what is very interesting to me is that it's not. This is why it is such an incredible turning point. All the elements of the previous thinkers are still there, but they have returns them in such a way that they are no longer transcendent. They are no longer outside there, guaranteed by God or philosophical God, doesn't matter. But they become modes of organizing the world that belong to the individual.
Good.
And that's why it brings together all this shift that the Enlightenment brought from the theological organized world to the rational scientific world.
Okay, so before we enter into the critique of pure reason, literally, what is being critiqued in the critique of pure reason?
The image of reason itself.
The image of reason itself, great,
As a sort of an absolute.
as an absolute. So, in fact, he could have just said the critique of reason. But he says the critique of pure reason. Why?
But because he's going right into those two principles, which are the two sides of the same, atheism of identity, atheism of contradiction, which were conceived as absolute, true, eternal truth that can and could not be had to be accepted as such as the ground of all logic. And he said even there, he finds need for at least understanding really how they work, so that they can be put to work before.
So, another, yes, I think it's true, but another much more, like, let's say, simple version of this, is that by putting pure in front of reason, it alerts anybody who comes across that there might be another form of reason. Because if you're critiquing this thing called pure reason, and usually people understand reason as a so-called analytic thinking process, the pure makes it clear that there's at least one other type of reason other than pure. Because, and that other kind of reason is what he's going to develop. That is what he's going to, that's his gift, different form of reason. And in order to have this different form of reason, you have to have a sense of how he's using the transcendental, which is, so we've already, I think, covered the ground enough to have a sense of how he's using analytic versus, synthetic, sorry. Now, if we go to the transcendental doctrine of elements, thank you for reading this. He starts to bring in the question of appearance, the question of intuition, and the question of the sensibility. Now, or sensation. Now, what I want to ask you before we delve into this then is, in the making of your artwork, do you think that you rely on what's called intuition to make your work?
I think you have intuition.
It's a trap.
Where, I think you have intuition, but you can't rely on it.
Anybody think that you make work not using your intuition? Okay.
I think intuition is quite a funny word though. It's more like instinct. And I don't know what the difference between those are.
Okay.
But intuition implies some form of rational thinking going on somewhere that you're intuiting something from.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's something more direct that kind of cuts out some of that thinking, but is instinctual. And I'd say that comes into play.
Okay, how many people think that the instinct comes into play?
I think the problem is the in.
Of instinct or
Seeing things like this is like a repository again. So we haven't got rid of the repository. We're playing the repository.
and people are listening. It's just that Joe is desperately
Sorry.
doing your goals. Trying to keep quiet. Thank you. How many people go to their work, and when they're faced with, I don't know, a canvas or whatever you're faced with doing your work, you lunge into it? Or so how do you begin? How do you start? What's your start? What's your start to it?
Coincidence.
it's a coincidence. So, and you end up recognizing the coincidence.
Yeah.
So can you give an example to that?
Well, it's not fully formed, but the confidence without giving too much. It was the glazes on some pottery, knowledge of, or having seen Andy Warhol's exploding plastic inevitable sort of screens. There's something in that. It's, that gut sort of.
And so, okay, so.
But that's like a synthesis then, really, isn't it?
So you have this gut thing, and so when do you know when the gut is speaking to you about artwork?
I start shaking.
What's that?
I start shaking.
You start shaking.
I will literally start shaking when I hear like a
Yeah, it's
phrase.
the tremble, his cute buds tremble, isn't it?
But like when I hear a phrase, I work lots of with how things sound.
Yeah.
And when I hear something, it just makes me happy. Which is basically my ears start vibrates. My throat wants to say it in 20 different ways. I just react to it. Literally physical reaction to it.
Anybody?
And then I do something with it.
And then you do something with it, and what do you do with it just depends.
Depends.
Okay, so the word depends, the word coincidence, tremoring.
Well, there is dependence on what I know will work, as in by now.
Okay.
Especially.
Okay,
There
and
is
what does that?
something.
So there is a skill level that has to
Skill, not skill, but there is.
skill, not skill.
So, I don't know, it's not skill, not skill, but there's something that, because I've already did something, and there was something very similar to it happening before, and I did something involved to something
And
else.
would that something that?
I can follow the system of.
And would you say that that's an analytic decision you're making, or is that a synthetic decision? When you're thinking, oh, well, this worked, that didn't work.
It's synthetic because it might also, the thing that didn't work might actually work this time.
Okay,
So
good,
it
okay.
opens up things.
So on the one hand, you have the synthetic moment going on,
Yeah.
a priori synthetic moment. On the other hand, you have the gut. Who else has a gut reaction?
Yeah.
Everybody has a gut reaction. Is there anybody that doesn't have a gut reaction in their artwork?
No, I don't like the
Yes,
idea of
me.
gut reaction because it comes from giving all the importance to articulating linguistically things, meaning for what happens in the studio or wherever one is working, and which doesn't pass through the bridge of linguistic articulation, must be called gutter and all the other dirty things. And it's just works according to different principles altogether. It's not that. And there are two aesthetics in Kant, and the intuition somehow exists in two meanings as well. Because what he uses here for intuition is not the Peter's part that we have in the latest meaning of intuition, where all things come back together and all of a sudden they're like leaped there. It's not that. You know, intuition here is specific synthesis, very logical, where forms of organizing the data of the senses, pick the raw data, package them in such a way that they make sense for us.
Right.
Well, it has pure intuition and empirical intuition.
Yes, but nevertheless, it does. Pure intuition is that I know there is space and time. Empirical intuition is that I know that this pen must be somewhere in space and time.
But where does the famous gut come into play? He rises from the ashes of the
I'm just
couch.
saying, just to slightly reframe, it's not, for me, I imagine it may be different for lots of people. For me, it's not like, oh, I have a kind of flash of inspiration or a gut reaction and then I make a work.
Right.
Different works come out in different ways, and quite often there's some kind of, let's say, analytical framework set up within which you may start either making studies or doing a certain something, but it's the gut, and quite often it's when you're in it and doing something that then something kicks in, like a feeling or a gut reaction or a flash of something, which points away to then more work on bringing in skills or thoughts again. But it's that instinctual bit that you have to recognise and know, because you can't think about that or plan it in advance or know it.
That's where I put the dispossession rather than the instinct.
Sorry?
I think that's where I put the moment of the dispossession, the instinct.
Yeah.
So,
I'm always worried about the word instinct just because it sounds so, what's the right word? with an E, eugenics, sounds a bit eugenic-y. But that just could be me, I mean, just hearing it, I react to that word, because I don't understand instincts. I mean, I don't, I know you're not supposed to be now, but, I think of
eugenics are much more objective and calculating and analytic in a way, surely, in that there's a kind of a theory that's being followed through to a very grim conclusion.
well, no, I guess what it is for me is that for an instinct imply, or has often implied, doesn't have to imply, very, what I would consider sociological or societal mores that are put on interpretations of something, so female intuition, or female instinct, or male instinct.
You were born with it, basically.
You're born with it,
Which is
and therefore it seems to go, and I'm not
I
saying
see
you're
where you're
saying
going
that.
there, and I'm not talking about that kind
Right.
of instinct at all. It's more like some kind of bodily feeling, or like so I don't have shaking ears or anything, but you know, sometimes maybe I look at something or something's coming together, and you just kind of have some bodily feeling or something. Your gut reaction's a very good description because it is sometimes physically, and it's a kind of little thrill which the next time you look at that same thing you may never get again. So I always kind of say to students, you know, if you look at something and it thrills you in some way, hang on to that, because you know it might mean there's something there, and you need to look very closely to try and apply your brain and knowledge and skills to work out what that was that did that.
Yeah, but that's not the intuition, that's a reaction to the intuition.
That's the what?
The reaction to the intuition. The intuition is a judgment. I think much closer to what Jakob was saying. Is a judgment where I see that out of the many tries I have made, one starts expanding, has more potential, more possibilities, makes me think of more things, relates to more, and branches out very fast, and that speed might give me a feeling or another, but it's a judgment that takes place. This is why I was
It's a
rejecting the
judgment,
idea.
but not one that goes through the intellectual.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's not the
process.
linguistic one. This is why I rejected the idea.
That's what,
I think
Yes,
sometimes
exactly
it's just
right.
physical and it's time based as well, because sometimes I'll take a photo and you just know immediately that's it, that's the one, without having to even look at it again. It's
Okay.
like a kind of, it is, actually I do feel it in my gut, like totally like, oh wow.
But
I just
this
stop now.
this kind of reason, I want to use the word reason at the moment, is not going through the brain, as it were. Like, you're not actually, it's not going through a calculation.
That's how it's
That it
is
feels, it is
experienced.
being experienced differently. Isn't that what you're
I
saying?
think we need to be very, very clear and very specific about it. It goes to the brain, it is intellectual,
No, yes,
it is
like a
not
light
linguistic.
it's just not linguistic,
It's not
that's correct.
linguistic.
Right.
The description will be too slow and too linear for it, because it needs to be simultaneous on various fronts, and needs to be able to feedback on itself, therefore it can do all this expansion at one at the same time.
Okay, now here's the crunch, yes. So we've got a notion now of reason that is not linguistic. And so the attack, as it were, is that it's an attack on using the linguistic notion of reason as the basis for either an analytic or a gut reaction. You're saying, or Kant is saying, we're going to sidestep that. We're not going to go into the linguistic move. We're going to go into the something other kind of reason. The something other kind of reason that allows one to feel or to have a sensibility or something like that. Now here's the rub. Everyone in this room claims that, or most everyone in this room has claimed that they get some kind of reaction, literally a physical reaction, a thrill. I like that. I think that would be a nice way to describe the methodology we do. It's thrilling. That's right. There's a thrill. No, I think that. But how do you know if it's any good? Let's say you just love what you're doing, but sadly, no one else does. Okay.
Then you need to analyse it, you need the concepts behind it too.
But how do you get to the stage where the little thrill you're feeling actually
starts to annoy you.
start to annoy you? No, the little thrill that you've got is indicative of the fact that it actually is good. You're going to make a normative assessment, as it were. Like we go around during, the MA shows and so on, and we assess the work. And we assign grades to them, even. some get an A, some get a B. How do you think that that's done? I mean, I don't sit there looking at the work and going, oh, it's giving me a thrill, or it hasn't given me a thrill. There are certain principles I'm looking at that either work or don't work.
We were discussing this last year, before Christmas ago. I name it as it depends how far it goes. But by how far it goes is how far the material I have chosen. And material is a very interesting word because for me materials, for example, are systems of meaning, so there is very little tangible in it. How far the intervention I make on that material alters it so the echo is spread very far and recognizable by a lot of people. It sounds very economical as a way of judging it, but I believe that's also in the most traditional way of working in art. This is why the person that paints a pot of flowers Sunday afternoon does not make a piece of art, and Van Gogh flowers in the pot are.
Say it again, why that's the case?
Because it depends how far it goes, how much resonance it gets.
Oh, I see, right,
How much thought and reaction it generates, how many questions and how deep the questions are that it raises.
So
What if no one ever saw Van Gogh's painting of flowers in a vase?
But that's why the
they were
work...
stuffed in his attic and we never found it. Is then it not art anymore?
the famous tree falling in the forest.
This is why, for example, Van Gogh became famous after he died.
Yeah.
I never think
Yeah,
of
but
that
still,
as a possibility.
if no one saw it after he died, though, it just...
But you can also turn the question around, and you can, I always wonder, the sculptures that the Cubists got from colonial hoarding from Africa were art or were cult objects. We call them art, we as Westerners, because we recognize a 3D object carved in wood as an art piece. But probably they weren't.
Yeah.
And it was sacrilegious to see them like that.
Okay, and also the notion of art itself has transformed over time and so on and so on. But I mean, this is where Kant, again, to circle back to little Kant, is important for us to also keep up with the break that's happening on a sort of global level, where art itself is moving away from being the kind of vessel around which something can be represented somewhere else, so represented. So so at first the artist cannot claim to be creative because that is a product of God, that's a principle of God, and that would be sacrilegious or blasphemous. So even in some circles today, that's still considered that way. So very, very traditional pieces of work, so we're talking the 900s further back, are all meant to be that God is speaking through the hand of the artist and the eye of the artist and so on and so forth, and the artist exists as this vessel to give presence to something else. It's only as later on, we're not looking at this in Kant. He's not the only one that's analyzing it, but he obviously has named this moment, the Enlightenment, and so on and so forth. So he gets a little bit of credit, kind of like the Leotard's postmodern. He's naming this moment of the Enlightenment, where what happens is the radical autonomy of the individual is a feature of reason, and this radical autonomy of the individual is a feature of having an imagination, and the imagination is considered human. That without an imagination, you are not being human, and that's part of the radical autonomy of this individual that he puts forward. And that's a very new concept at that point. Maybe people, men and women, but mainly men at that point, had reason, but why did you have to worry about imagination? Why was that even remotely considered important? And it's Kant that starts bringing this in as part of the Enlightenment, as that the Enlightenment is a feature of the not just privileging, but it's like the foundational sense of intelligence as creative. And so then the next move to this is to think about how these judgments are made, where one's own work is considered that it does work as a piece of work. Okay, with this in mind, we're not going to, with trepidation, go into the transcendental aesthetic. Now remember what I told you to start off with, the word aesthetic. Think about it meaning judgment. There's something more involved. It's not strictly judgment, because there's something about its style or its way of being presented that lends itself to a kind of judgment that is not simply an analytic judgment. Now, if you remember, not that I want to jump too far ahead, but if you remember the book that we didn't read but we thought about reading, and perhaps we will read at some point, The Analytic of the Sublime, Jean, what's the name, Lyotard's book.
Or was it the assassination of Stin?
No, we're going to read that as well.
Okay.
No, but this one, I think at one point we were thinking about, maybe it was just,
Read a week of it.
we did a week of it, yeah.
We could fit it.
Yeah,
It's so funny.
But
Do you really get to go on?
did you really like that one?
Oh, well, you know, I like
Anyway, the point is that he calls it an analytic, and it's not by accident that he's bringing back this thing called the analytic of the sublime. He's just going to parenthesis this. He's not calling it the experience of design. But where is your assassination of experience by painting? So again, this is a neo-Kantian restaging of how one understands experience as something that that needs to be killed off, because the lay sense of experience has inundated the formal sense of experience to such a degree that experience simply means something you encounter. It means an encounter of some kind. And it no longer has meant the kind of thing that it was meaning for the last 200 years, which had to do with this synthetic unity, this a priori synthetic judgment, yes?
My criticism to him is that my criticism to that is that he's barking up the wrong tree. Because by that time painting was no longer the thing of art.
Right.
And actually it was a very conservative return with postmodernism to paint, especially in that way, like Monori.
Yeah.
And art had gone through that surrealism, conceptual pop was expanding even more, and he's concentrating on that. So it's the synthetic judgment and the aesthetic judgment that Kant refers about was taking place somewhere else in art. Well, you agree with that.
Right. Good. That's a good footnote to that. Okay.
So this is why I find it so irritating.
I know. You get very irritated with the entire. We're going to go back to Kant now. Okay. Great. Oh, well, just before I brought this in to show this to you. Observations on the feeling of the beautiful and the sublime. This is a little book, a not very well-known little book of Kant's that is probably the best summary of his notion of the sublime I've ever come across, and it's written by Kant. And he wrote it so that people could, it's kind of like an introduction to my work. If you want to know really what I'm talking about in the sublime, get this book.
What's the title?
It's called Observations on the Feeling of the Beautiful and the Sublime, translated by John T. Goldthwait. It's kind of unfortunate. Goldthwait. Quick, in our case.
It's on Dropbox.
It's not on Dropbox now.
Oh, I can find it, I'm sure.
Yeah,
When you find things, you just go to the library and photocopy them all.
That's right. Do you want me to loan this then to you?
No,
No, you'll
I'll
find
look
it.
online first.
Okay. Just as well, because this is when I was a graduate student. I've had this book for quite some time. And as all graduate students, I've got so much writing in this that it's almost impossible to read it.
I prefer books like that.
I do too. Especially when they're my writing.
Because my mother's books dealt with stuff like that. She was prepared always to read them. We were always
In fact,
prepared.
this would actually not be odd here. To those familiar with the critical ethic, possibly the most conspicuous feature of the passages quoted, which I'm not going to do on the sublime, is the intuitionism it presupposes. It assumes the intuitive recognition of qualities encountered in experience and not at all the rational grounding of a principle that is applicable a priori. Even if the categorical imperative depends on a logical intuition, what is assumed here is an entirely different sort of intuition, a moral or aesthetic intuition. Okay, so he's just laying down sort of the groundwork, as it were, of how one goes forward. And he, just see if this, because it's such a complex thing. Let's see. This is a good argument. This is maybe understanding is sublime, wit is beautiful. Courage is sublime, artfulness is little but beautiful. Caution, said Cromwell, is a burgomaster's virtue. Veracity, honesty are simple and noble. Jest and pleasant flattery are delicate and beautiful. Graciousness is the beauty of virtue. And he goes on, so he starts to build how this different sense of reason is going to be used. Anyway, so this is, I'm going to, if we just go back to this notion of the judgment, the aesthetic judgment. Do you want to, who feels like, Jeff, would you feel like reading that? Which translation do you have again? Do you have the Norman Smith? Yeah.
Norman.
Okay. Norman.
Norman.
Okay, so this is going to be A19 or B34, page 65 in the Norman Smith, Norman Kent Smith translation. Go ahead.
In whatever manner.
Can you read the top of it?
Oh, transcendental doctrine of elements. First part. Transcendental aesthetics. Aesthetic.
One aesthetic.
One aesthetic. In whatever manner, or by whatever means, a mode of knowledge may relate to objects, intuition is that through which it is in immediate relation to them, and to which all thought as a means is directed.
So in this sense, Joe's comment about instinct would fit here, I think.
Sorry, I just drifted off of that bit.
Well, that's all right. Can you say?
You could paraphrase it.
It just said it's the immediate knowledge. It's immediate knowledge, basically. Go on.
But intuition takes place only insofar as object is given to us. This again is only possible to man at least. Oh, I lost it. Sorry, one more time. But intuition takes place only insofar as the object is given to us. This again is only possible to man at least, insofar as the mind is affected in a certain way. Their capacity, receptivity, for receiving representations through the mode in which we are affected by objects is entitled sensibility. Objects are given to us by means of sensibility, and it alone yields us intuitions. They are thought through the understanding, and from understanding arise concepts. But all thought must directly or indirectly, by way of certain characters, relate ultimately to intuitions, and therefore with us to sensibility, because in no other way can an object be given to us.
Right?
Yeah.
Does this need to be dissected in any way, shape, or form? Good. No. Matteo, are you going to say something? Okay. Okay, so now, next paragraph.
No, next person, please.
Next one?
Next person, please.
Oh, next person. Oh, that's so funny. Lee, can you take that one? The effect.
The effect of an object upon the faculty of representation, so far as we are affected by it, is sensation.
Okay, so you get that? So the effect, not affect, because it's very trendy these days to talk about affect, effect of an object upon the faculty of representation. So far as we are affected by it, is its sensation. What does he mean by faculty here? Does he mean like, you know, the Birmingham Institute of Art and Design is a faculty? What's a faculty?
The
What's a,
ability of, the capacity of.
okay.
And yeah, Dane's translation says capacity.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Oh, read your translation.
The effect of an object on the capacity for representation, insofar as we are affected by it, is sensation.
Okay, so now you know that the faculties of which universities have taken on as a title, in fact, we're in a faculty, we're in the Faculty of Art and Design, soon to become the Faculty of Art, Design, Media, and New Media and Music and something else. By the way, you know, they're going to rename, I know, I suggested Madam, which was, yes, I thought it was quite good, which was Music, Art, Design, Architecture, and Media. And they wanted to stick with Adam, which I thought was typical. Yeah. Madam is great.
Good, yeah. Sounds dropping.
Madam, I know.
Yeah.
So I think we should call ourselves the Institute, the Madam Institute. Okay, goodbye. That's right, that's true. That's true. Okay, so anyway, so the
His faculty then relates to the question Lauren raised earlier about how rigid this system is, because faculties has capacity of and plastic with themselves. And if one wants to jump to the present, my no knowledge but image of cognitive studies is precisely about the plasticity of the brain, of adapting itself to learn whatever it needs to learn, however it needs to learn it. So there is something here that and the whole structure of the critical approach was not criticizing Kant. What was criticized later by the new Kantians was that he fixed 12 specific modes for organizing knowledge, and they criticized those 12, but not the critical approach itself.
that's right, yeah. Do you remember the 12?
No.
But that was very well said. Okay. Does anybody know the 12? Okay. What you need to pull from here, we'll discuss this more properly as we continue, but is the way in which the word sensation is being brought in the senses. Because again, it's as though people have never read this work. I sometimes think when I'm looking at work on the senses and the sensibilities, you know, the need to go back to the senses and the logic of the senses and so on. If you read Deleuze's Logic of Sense, he's coming from Kant on this. But if you look at the way in which the notion of the senses is understood as like smelling, hearing, this kind of notion of sense, this is not the Kantian move. And so you need to be, just like the word experience, you need to know that it's just littered with layers of complex meanings that you're going to drag in by accident if you're not careful with your work. Okay, so we're going to skip over this because I think that's worth just skipping because I want you to get to now. If you can, maybe. Okay, so if you can now read, Lee, the last sentence on that page, and you go to matter on page 66. Actually, if you can go down to the science of all principles of an a priori sensibility. Can you get down to there? So if you go from that in the appearance which corresponds to sensation.
Yeah, okay. That in the appearance which corresponds to sensation, I term its matter. But which so determines the manifold of appearance, that is allows of being ordered in certain relations, I term the form of appearance. That in which alone the sensations can be posited and ordered in a certain form cannot itself be sensation, and therefore, while the matter of all appearance is given to us
A posteriori.
a posteriori only, its form must lie ready for the sensation a priori in the mind, and so must allow of being considered apart from all the sensation.
So, what is matter? Is matter the same thing as the object? Like, would I say that this is matter? This can, Pepsi Max, not meant to be an ad.
Is this the person to ask what I'd say?
Yeah, yeah. What's the difference between matter and this as an object?
That's a defined, resolved thing.
And the
Identity.
matter,
Matter's out. Isn't what it's made up of, and it's not the form of the thing. It's architect. It's going back to that architectonic
the
thing.
architectonic thing, yes, good. And
It's the sum of its parts.
so when Bergson writes memory and matter, matter and memory, what type of matter is he talking about? Is he talking about material? What does he mean when he says matter? What is meant when the word matter is now thrown out here? Would it be fair to say that it's an ingredient? Would that be a matter? If I said, what's the matter, literally, what am I asking you? If I say, Lee, what's the matter? What am I implying by that question?
You want to know what's wrong?
What's wrong?
Yes.
Right. And when I say what's wrong, when we want to know what's wrong, it's because there obviously is a right way of being. So the matter is presenting itself as you're emanating wrongness. Your appearance is emanating something is wrong, and therefore I'm going to say, what's the matter to you? And you're going to realize that I've just invoked Kant in this. All right, because I'm not actually asking you what literally is the material that is making up this thing called Lee. I'm asking, what is your emotional scenario going on that is making you somehow wrong, or somehow this thing called Lee wrong. And that is very critical to understand that use of matter there. So now when you go off and do your work and you use the word matter, be cognizant of the fact that the matter the matter that the Kantian matter is always raising with it a sensibility. It's always having the effect and the affect thrown at you by asking what's the matter. Just think of it that way. You know, the other day I saw Sophie and it was like, what's the matter? And what the matter was is that she was moving house and she's like having to deal with that.
Maybe even bring that.
Yeah, and that was like a very serious matter. Right, so think about it that way. A lot of these expressions that we have, these kind of, they come from, watered down philosophy, basically, in this case. All right, so the term matter has to do with the form of its appearance. So there's Lee sitting there, and I'm going, what's the matter, Lee? And Lee is going, you should, I had to be at a certain place earlier today, working with a certain group of people earlier today, and that's what the matter is. Okay, and now, so the appearance of what the matter is what? What is if I say to Lee, what's the matter? How does that appear? How am I knowing that there is a matter that's appearing? What? Are we actually going back to the beginning? Back to the future? How do I know? What am I what's
The
being...
capacity, the receptivity for receiving representations,
Yes.
which was receiving the matter of Lee, is a type of sensibility.
Good.
So because you're sensible to receive a matter,
Yes.
to receive the representation of what's the matter, you can.
So
You can
so it's not a language game. So it's not like we're speaking some language and I'm translating this other thing. There's another register at work here on reason that's allowing me to ask you the question, what's the matter? and the answer to the question is, had a crummy day, or whatever it is, and it's manifesting itself.
It goes back to intuition, though, doesn't it?
Yes?
You intuit.
And that's why, that's exactly right. So, but I'm trying to explain how intuition is a very sensitive decoding button you have in your head that's going on. And you're picking up on the vibrations, as they would say, without trying to sound too like horrifically like 1960s, you know, bad vibe, you know, you got some kind of aura or something that you're putting out, some kind of bad feeling.
I get accused of that one.
Yeah, and meanwhile, you're just this, just this fun-loving guy, and you're sitting there doing, minding your own beeswax and all the rest of that kind of stuff, and someone just gets so annoyed, and it's because they're taking this code, and they're recoding or decoding, or anyway, badly coding what is the matter. And that's what Kant is laying this out as one of the very first rules of the game, that's the non-linguistic game.
And that it would be the manifold of the appearance. You can do that ordered in certain relation, which he calls form.
Yes, and that we're going to call Lee. Okay, so now we know that a Lee is the manifold of appearances that creates a matter that we can hear, or feel, or see. But it doesn't have a linguistic presence. Okay? So this is very, very crucial for your work.
There's a definition up in here, Fibili of reflection.
On where?
Fibili of concepts of reflection.
What page is that on?
277, no, sorry, 279, 280, sorry, 280.
Wait.
Form, matter and form.
It's on page 280.
Hmm.
Matter and form. Great. Can you read that aloud?
Yep. In the category theories, Kent Smith. Matter and form. The two concepts underlie all other reflections, so inseparably are they bound up with or entwined to the understanding. The one, matter, signifies the determinable in general, the other, form, its determination, both in the transcendental sense, abstraction being made from all difference in that which is given, and from the mode in which it is determined.
Great. Excellent. Parenthesis, Lee Hewitt. You didn't realize that you were going to be this Kantian example.
No issue with that at all, really.
This is supreme. Thank you, Mark. That was excellent. Okay, let's go back to this bit here. Who just yawned?
I did. I yawned earlier, but
Okay, ready?
because of
Okay, so now, Lee, can you continue so we can get down to space? So we got the question of. Hold on, I skipped a. No, I skipped. Sorry, I skipped a page. Okay, so we're here with the notion of this a posteriori, a priori. So do you know what a posteriori means? After, right. So I come upon Lee's bad mood because I first come upon Lee. So the sensibility comes in after the encounter of the actual object. Mattia, were you going to say something?
But he also explains that a posteriori is logic afterwards.
Mhm.
As in, a posteriori is the judgment that they're seeing something from experience, it's not only analytic.
Right,
So it's
that's
always-
exactly right. In fact, it's not only analytic, it's often not ever analytic.
It's from experience, isn't it?
Well, it's a synthetic judgment.
Yeah.
Right.
So experience has to be in there.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so, yes?
Yeah, I was just saying, he's taking this, I think, from Hume's matter of fact is a fact which comes from experience. So we know as a matter of fact because
Right. All those kind of expressions are fantastic when you think about it. Because matter is simply referring to the sensible, like the senses of the sensible, not like the common sensible, common sense. Great. And do you know which Hume? Where in Hume? Is it the pure understanding? Human understanding.
Is that the, if that's the big one, isn't it?
He has a lot of good ones. But try and remember. Try and find that out for us. Okay, that was very good. Okay, so let's now go to the notion of space. I want to try and see if we can get to space and time today. What you want to say on this?
No, Joe just laughed. Sorry.
You also pushed the yawn.
That wasn't me at that point.
Okay, so if we skip over to, well, just so you have the sentence here in your head before we do, on page 66, the science of all principles of a priori sensibility, of a priori, not a posteriori, a priori sensibility is the transcendental aesthetic. So a priori sensibility happens when? The famous repository. That's what I love about you. You come up with a good word and you defend it to the death. Okay. You've let go of event somehow. Excellent. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. No, you just slightly let go for a second. You've got repository. Okay. You want to explain that?
Oh, it's just before, so making it kind of sort of stored somewhere. So this
So okay, then we shouldn't have skipped the paragraph. I term all representations pure in the transcendental sense, in which there is nothing that belongs to sensation. The pure form of sensible intuitions in general, in which all the manifold of intuition is intuitive in certain relations, must be found in the mind a priori. This pure form of sensibility may also be called pure intuition. Thus, if I take away from the representation of a body that which the understanding thinks in regard to it, substance, force, divisibility, etc., and likewise what belongs to sensation, impenetrability, hardness, color, etc., something still remains over from this empirical intuition, namely extension and figure. Think back to now discourse figure, and to try and remember where Lyotard is grasping the notion of figure here. I term all representations pure in the transcendental sense, in which there is nothing that belongs to sensation. The pure form of the sensible intuitions in general, in which all the manifold of intuitions is intuited in certain relations, must be found in the mind a priori. This pure form of sensibility may also be called pure intuition. Thus, if I take away from the representation of a body that which the understanding thinks in regard to it, substance, force, divisibility, etc., and likewise what belongs to sensation, impenetrability, hardness, color, etc., something still remains over from this empirical intuition, namely extension and figure. So, in the first example that I was saying with the matter, what's the matter with Lee, that way of getting it redressed with Lee saying, well, I was in the middle of this, my problem, or that you're grasping something that has a matter, you're grasping the matter, that's the a posteriori. So it's a form of intelligibility that he is going to place on the side because he wants to now develop this notion of a priori sensibility. Do you remember what a priori sensibility? We only did this an hour ago, so it's not that far away. Do you remember the a priori sensibility?
Was it like a principle, axiom, or?
It's like a principle, like an axiom. Good. And why is it like that? Or in fact that? How is it that sensibility can turn into an axiom of some kind?
It's synthesized.
Okay. Good.
But it works.
mean
Doesn't mean what?
well,
It works doesn't mean just repeat your sentence?
well, it works, but just because that is this kind of like it's too much to say it's natural, so then you're saying it's self-evident.
Right. Right. So it's like, yes, okay, but the question, sorry, the question, what is an a priori sensibility? Do you remember? Kant is very difficult, isn't it?
Is it what you were saying about second order?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Second-hand knowledge. didn't you say?
Let's finish the whole sentence here. The science of all principles of a priori sensibility I call transcendental aesthetic. There must be such a science, forming the first part of the transcendental doctrine of elements, in distinction from that part which deals with principles of pure thought and which is called transcendental logic. In the transcendental aesthetic, we shall therefore first isolate sensibility by taking away from it everything which the understanding thinks through its concepts, so that nothing may be left save empirical intuition. Secondly, we shall also separate off from it everything which belongs to sensation, so that nothing may remain save pure intuition and the mere form of appearances, which is all that sensibility can supply a priori. In the course of this investigation, it will be found that there are two more pure forms of sensible intuition, serving as principles of a priori knowledge, namely space and time. I felt compelled that we had to get to space and time before we called time on this. Okay, I want to figure out a different way to do Kant, because this strikes me as very painful. But maybe it's okay. I just think that I feel like we're trudging through treacle, we're figuring out certain things, we're not figuring out other things, and I'm not sure what's happened. Are you exhausted? Are you? No.
I'm
Yes.
quite exhausted. I couldn't get my head around it.
But
Yeah,
is there, I didn't want to revert to giving lectures. I could do this, but I have this obsession now to try and see if you can begin to grasp this, but maybe that's just not the best way to proceed, because I don't want you to, there isn't an answer to the Kantian moves, but you need to at least have the outlines. So I need to understand what's the best way for you to grasp this.
I was trying to do a diagram of this a bit,
Okay.
but I couldn't get things in. I haven't got it. I don't think I've got it right.
Well, you started with empirical in the center there.
Oh no, I started with like the object, and then sort of got sensation, mind. I've got this sort of mind effect sensation, and capacity of sensibility here, but also complement capacity of representation. Sort of there. Then we'll get coming down from that to this intuition, which I thought was empirical intuition, but then I wasn't quite sure whether the thought through understanding was sort of like after the empirical intuition or before you got to the empirical intuition. And then you've got the pure intuition. I'm not quite sure whether that's coming off, that's like totally divided, that's not coming off the sensation. That's sort of here with its arrows. Or this pure intuition is, like really there's intuition here and there's empirical sort of intuition and there's pure intuition. And then because you get to these appearances and where the appearances, two different distinctions he makes about appearances of the form and the matter one. So I just couldn't get the diagram to be sort of make sense
To make sense of what this is, yeah. Anybody else want to give it a go?
regarding the pure intuition, my understanding is that you cannot fit it in the diagram because it's not a moment of the building of knowledge. That is when one stops and says, well, I need to be able to think space and time because no object is given to me but in space and time. That's the pure intuition, it's thinking space and time, and is not associated with any specific instance of experience.
Right.
This is why it doesn't fit in that, in a visual graphic.
Or to put it slightly differently, it is implied in the entire graphic.
Yeah.
It is always already in there.
Yeah.
But also because sometimes it's a logical stages, therefore they cannot be laid out graphically because that would be linear in a way that is not some chronological of it.
I mean, one of the things I find really fabulous about reading Leibniz and Kant and Hegel, up to a certain point with Hegel, but less so, I think, is that it's such a different way of thinking. It is not a linear way of thinking. It is not a continuity of sorts. And what happens when one is trying to read Kant, in this case, is that one's applying a very rational grid, really, to try and understand what's being said here, and you simply have to let go of that if you can possibly do this. The way in which you read Kant is, I mean, this might sound very sad, but you should take a nice bubble bath, and in your bubble bath, have the book somehow situated so you can turn pages and not get it wet, because you have to protect the book. But in a very relaxed state, where you drift in and drift out, and not really with the furrowed brow, like Nietzsche always says, if you have to squint too hard to get a concept, it's bad philosophy, is basically Nietzsche's usual statement. So it's this way of letting this thing flow over you, so you get the feel of it. There's something in the Kantian moves that have spawned all this stuff about groundless grounds and weird forms of radical autonomies of knowledge that he's trying to get at here. And I don't want to beat you over the head with this by saying, well, what about this and what about that? So I'm just trying to think, what would be the best way forward? We've got basically 4 weeks. We're definitely not going to finish half of the book, let alone all the stuff we've got on the table, literally, in that time, in the manner in which we're progressing at this pace. So one suggestion I have is if it's possible, let's say that one of you or a couple of you can take, the space section, and somebody else can take the time section, and think it through in relation to literally the piece of work you're working on right now. Not your work in general, but is there a way that this can relate to exactly what you're doing right now? I'm assuming you're doing some form of artwork right now. Is that possible? Would that be a good thing? Would that help you? Because you need to digest these concepts, otherwise they're just going to go in one eye and out the other.
I can relate time to what I'm trying to write now.
Perfect. Okay. Jakob, you want to try the space?
I can try it.
Yeah, great. Anybody else want to jump in? You go time?
Yeah.
Anybody else want to go space? Good, Stuart. You knew it was going to fall in. He was focusing so hard on that pencil.
I am not here. I am not here. Let me go.
That's right. Sophie. Time.
Space, please.
Space. Okay, good. Time.
So two distinct teams. Space.
We're going to have the time team and we're going to have the space team. Time. Space.
There's no time.
No time.
No time.
That was very quick. How about space?
I don't know if it relates to what, but yeah, I was just trying to just continue.
Okay, how about if you just look at the very first, the metaphysical exposition of this concept of space, okay, and how it's relating to whatever it is you're working on. Okay, this is what you're working on. It's an artwork. That's fine. Anybody else want to be brought into the fray?
Would I be allowed to link it to the linguistic term?
No.
That would be forbidden.
No. You can look at your performance that you might be doing. I want you to come up with, I know it's hard, but I want you to think about a different model. Good. Good. Okay, so in that case, what would you prefer? Time or space?
Space.
Space. Okay, good. Mark?
Let's talk about time space. Let's talk about music.
See, don't you get upset with Mark? You know, it's
What
like,
did
it
you
was-
say?
he wasn't talking about the whole thing, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, Joe?
I'm coming next week, so the class
So you're not gonna even come. Samira? Space? Yeah, it's good. Tamsin?
I'll do time.
Time, excellent. Lee, did we get you on one?
Yeah, you said time, but I think it's space would be
Okay, so who's the time team? Okay, 1, 2, 3. We only have 3 times.
Small time.
Small time team. Okay,
Same
4.
thing.
4 in the time team.
I'm not sure which I'm choosing.
Okay, you're going to choose the time then.
Time is
Time.
Are you thinking
Time is
of
okay.
that?
Yeah.
Was there something you had in mind?
But you think I should go time?
Well, I thought time would be more obvious. for
Yeah,
that one.
maybe.
Come on, Sophie,
Maybe
come
there's
to
a
the
re-
dark
maybe
side.
there's a reason you chose space.
No, it's because I'm doing spatial stuff for my show at the end. That's what I'm thinking more.
Okay, you're going to stick with space.
No, Jo says I should do, because she just saw my work. I had a tutorial with her this morning, which was really good. And she thinks I should go time, which is the piece I'm doing now. Yeah, maybe I
Piece you're
should.
doing for the magic thing, so
Yeah.
might be time to think about it.
Okay,
Okay,
I'll go
time. So now who's the time team again? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Who's the space team? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Excellent. I'm going to write this down. Okay.
On the door.
That's right. Yes, I might have to put it on the door. Time team. Time team. See, hello world. This is how we teach Kant in the proper way. Time team. That's right.
One by one.
Uh,
Però doppia lasciare la ministra.
where are we going to place Grace? She was absent.
In the middle, so she needs to decide who wins.
Cut in half.
Oh, that's- okay, and then the space team is Lauren, Stuart, Sarah, and Kate. Is that right? Well, I'm missing somebody. Who am I missing in space?
Time.
No, I got 10. You're on time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, 5, Lee.